27.
26.
25 seconds.
24. 23.
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
22 seconds. 19.
18. 17 seconds.
16.
15 seconds.
14.
13 seconds.
12. 11.
10 seconds.
9.
8.
7.
6. 6 what?
Copy.
5 seconds.
3. 2. 1.
Welcome to Subspace Chatter, where we boldly go into discussing Star Trek, and today we will be discussing the Star Trek film First Contact. Let's go around and do introductions. My name is Vanessa, and I host a YouTube channel called I Love Bad Star Trek. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a former longtime admin of Memory Alpha, now I'm chief editor of warpfactortrack.com.
Hey, I'm Eve. I'm actually the privacy officer for the USS Chinook, and I'm also the director of the Starfleet Academy College of Music.
Lovely to have everybody. Let's start with some questions about the movie. Why does Riker tease Worf after the Defiant is out of commission? Talk about the worst possible thing to say to somebody at the worst possible time. I never thought Riker would be that big of a jerk to just be like, hey, you still know how to shoot a gun? As his ship was disabled, the Defiant of all things, the pride that Klingons have in battle. He was ready to ram the Borg cube. He was ready to die. And Riker makes this comment that I'm surprised he didn't just haul off and rip his throat out, honestly.
I think it's because he was trying. Well, there is a history between Riker and Worf where Riker does take jabs at Worf throughout the series to begin with, especially because Worf takes himself far too seriously in Riker's opinion. And I think the implication there was more not so much to do with the Defiant having been destroyed, but thinking, you're getting soft sitting on that space station over there because being occupied with all the things Enterprise is occupied with, chances are they're unaware in the timeline of just how bad things are starting to get with the Dominion. So I'm thinking he was just trying to tease him, you've been out to pasture for a while in that nice space station. Are you still sure you can do anything? And I mean, Riker does have a history of being a bit of a douchebag.
I'd agree with that.
I just thought his crew, Worf was on the Defiant, so clearly he's battle ready. He was already fighting. That he wasn't coming straight from DS9 to the Enterprise E. He was on the Defiant getting beamed out just so that he could help along the Enterprise E with its stake in the battle and everything. So why was Data able to turn off his emotion chip and sort of regress in terms of his character? I thought that was an odd choice.
Oh, Dan disappeared.
He'll be back. What do you think, Eve?
Well, for me, I'm thinking that would go back to because Data's emotion chip in the past has been used against him. Lore used it against him, and Lore would turn it on, turn it off, turn it up, that kind of thing. So the precedent was already there that could be done with the emotion chip. And Data in reality is still very practical. So I think he would have probably made that decision. I want to have the ability to turn it off because there may be times when it's impractical for me to have this. So that way he can't be controlled. But
does it mean to you that maybe Data hasn't really figured out how to regulate the emotions aside from switching them off? Like, is it just...
I think so, because we see a little bit of that when he's like, I'm feeling some anxiety, and he starts to describe it to Picard. And I mean, because Data was always fascinated with that facet of humanity, but you could see he was getting very unnerved by it. So I think he still gets overwhelmed by it because he hasn't had time to learn how to handle and process things. Like even humans, when we get a new emotion that can be quite intense, if we've never felt it before or dealt with it, it can be a bit much to process.
Yeah, I guess that's why toddlers are the way they are. What do you think, Dan? Why do you think Data was able to turn off his emotion chip? Do you think it was for his functionality? Do you think it was just a writing snafu? Like, why do you think he was able to do that?
Like, I think he's a bit similar to George of the Forge in this film, where like the technology is improving over time, basically. Being an android, his systems are improving over time. You already see, like, it takes an interest in the emotion chip and in generations. So like, why not, like, also take an interest in how it actually, how compatible it is with his own systems. And as for LaForge, obviously in this film, like he goes from having had a visor in generations to the optical eyes.
So, for a cybernetic species that absorbs and assimilates, why does the Queen want an equal and resort to seduction? I thought that it has to do with Borg's relationship with consent. They are typically just sort of imposing themselves on people and assimilating them without permission. What they want from people is permission. They do that, and the way that they do that is through seduction, to willingly become part of the collective versus just, you're going to be part of the collective. That's how I understand that. Picard even says it towards the end, they want someone to volunteer to be in the collective versus just, because they have the ability to just assimilate people without their permission. And that's how I interpreted the purpose of the seduction.
I have to wonder if the seduction was a little bit just fan service. Because it's not like they don't have a history of that. I mean, cat suits. Because quite frankly, look, Counselor Troi's outfit would not actually fly on a starship, to be honest. Even Jellicoe makes her change it. They brought in 7 of 9 for fan service initially. So I'm kind of wondering if they just do that because it would be, hey, let's just put this in here for the 12-year-old sitting in the basement who's staring at this.
Yeah, I did honestly find the sort of like the sexual angle of the sort of like Data's captivity to be something I was uncomfortable with, to be completely honest. Like there was a lot of things in a row that weren't up to him, and he's supposed to be like turned on by it and sort of seduced into the collective, and I just didn't buy it. And thankfully at the end, he was lying. He was like just stringing her along, but I wish that they like put something in the scene to sort of indicate that, rather than just looking as if he was being swept away in a romantic thing. How about you, Dan? What do you think
I preferred that.
Oh,
yeah, because
okay.
I like the surprise of that he's not actually being persuaded by her, and it's a surprise to the audience. But I was thinking as well, like, with Data's like romantic life or whatever, like they had in theory, but it's not even implied in that, as far as I can remember, that like he has sexual relations with Janet Sora. So it's not since like the first season with Tasha Yar that it's like implied that it has had. So that's quite a in in the development of a show and stuff like that. To go through 7 seasons, and obviously yes, he's an android, but at the same time, like he does say, like he's fully functional. But
Although
yeah,
Tasha was under the influence of whatever that weird thing was in that episode.
Also, Tasha
Holy
had
water.
shared in that context like something really painful. And so to sort of like just redo that line sort of took it felt I mean, it was obviously a callback to season 1, ha ha ha, he's making that same statement, but it like, as bad as that episode in season 1 was, I thought that there was some emotional vulnerability there, and Data was like trying to be present for her.
Yeah.
And so to like sort of recycle that line when he had a sort of affection for her felt like his affection for Tasha Yar was diminished. That's how I what I took away from that.
I think I take it like that it's just like part of his programming that he'd been in a particular situation. That was what his response or reaction would be.
Yeah. I guess like he doesn't have like a lot of protocols as to how to have discussions around sex. Maybe that's just something he recites, like you said, like he just sort of like lets them know I can do this. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
I can even be a flotation device.
Right. Like, why does Troi seem to laugh off her assault at the hands of Zephyr and Cochrane? She recalls like getting drunk a night before with Riker on Earth and says, "Oh yeah, Zephyr and Cochrane like couldn't keep his hands off of me," and it's just sort of glossed over. Like, that's not okay. That's not like it just felt really out of place and strange. And we're supposed to like, I understand that throughout the movie, we're supposed to see Zephyr and Cochrane more as a human versus like this, pinnacle, this saint, this like, pioneer into the future. And he's just a flawed human being. But I felt like that pushed him into being a genuinely ungood person.
Again, there's still a lot of that in the old Trek, and I know people bring up the name Rick Berman in that context as to why we have stuff like that. But a couple of thoughts on that. One, she is a Betazoid, so she would be able to read what his intentions were, even though we don't know that. So she might have just read his intentions as he's just being a sloppy drunk, because some people, when they get drunk, they get a little bit handsy. And it may not have been a big deal. Or because she says it to Riker, you have to wonder if maybe it was just to make Riker a little bit jealous, because they were still in that whole will they, won't they, will they, won't they thing.
Yeah. I can think of better ways to, be honest about feelings. I think I don't know if like she has sort of played mind games with him in the past, so I can maybe see that. Like I remember a season 1 episode where she was like arranged to marry somebody in Haven, and she's like, "Well, you chose your career." But yeah, I guess that it's an issue that I have with the writing of women in general, to be like petty and like catty. Anyway, what do you think, Dan? Why do you think that happened? That Troi laughed off her assault.
I thought that the second point that he made was made a lot of sense to me.
The jealousy?
Yeah. And yeah, it's maybe not what actually happened. But I was thinking earlier when we were talking about the Borg Queen, I was thinking like it seems like you were saying like the Borg and the Borg Queen can assimilate like humans, pretty easily. But I think like I can't remember a time when Data was assimilated, or androids at all. I was like wondering, is that even possible? And maybe like she uses like sexuality is just a way to, she'll use anything at her disposal to you know, to persuade people and assimilate people and have control.
Right.
Well, it was implied by her that her and Picard were like, Picard was more than just her drone. Like, she implied quite heavily that there was quite possibly some adult time that went on between them of some kind.
Yeah, but again, didn't seem like he was as a Borg drone, you have to wonder that can't have been consensual. That can't have So it was really striking towards the end where he was like trying to sort of trade himself for data. And it's like you could see in his face, because Patrick Stewart can act, the past sort of written on his face, like, I really don't want to do this. This is just bringing up everything for me. But I will to save my friend. And that is what he said to Lily when she left on the escape pod. I need to save my friend.
And it's reminding me of that he basically does the same thing with LaForge in Generations.
Mm-hmm.
And then later you got Data does it in Nemesis for Picard.
Right. Is Cochrane's genius a contributing factor to his alcoholism? Most brilliant minds have a vice like alcohol, or is it a case of seen too much, lived too much, and just can't cope?
I'd say a bit of column A, a bit of column B, because I mean, one, you do look at most of the geniuses and the inventive and creative minds, and all of them had something. I mean, like Tesla had his own things.
Pigeons.
Yeah, Berlioz composed his Symphonie Fantastique after a week-long bender of opium and absinthe. Like Mozart was a heavy drinker. Like all these great minds had such bad vices, but at the same time, Cochrane would have lived through the war, like World War III and what came after and everything. So, and we all know that when times get hard and the world gets dark, like we've been dealing with for the past couple of years, those things tend to come out more because people need a coping mechanism. And in absence of one, they'll seek out anything.
Right. I also think that, like, with geniuses, we give them a lot more latitude in terms of what we accept in terms of their behavior. We sort of like would give them a very wide berth. That's just who they are. They're just quirky. They're, whether they're violent, abusive, alcoholic, what have you, because, from afar, we could appreciate their genius, but to the people in their life, they're clearly self-destructing and imploding. So like it's Cochran. Like, right. So
he was abusive to his wife. I know that.
What do you think, Dan? Like, do you think A, B, do you think it's his genius that drives him to drink? Do you think that he's just a bitter old man that has seen too much?
I agree with Eve that I think it was a bit of both, which I was thinking before she replied. Also, like, I was thinking, like, you were all the examples you were giving were real world, but I did like consider, like, even like Sherlock Holmes, who's got like a drug addiction, similarly. What else? And I guess it's another way of the writers making the characters seem more flawed than, Roddenberry-esque humans who have been like perfected by the 24th century, apparently.
Yeah, so do you think that Zephyr is a placeholder for Jean? Because I thought Wesley was.
I think more than one can be.
Yeah. Both can be true at the same time. That's for sure. Like, but Zephyr very proudly proclaims that he is not in it for anything other than money
and babes.
Yeah.
And babes.
Yeah, I love that he just regards women as objects. It's great. And it definitely ties in with his sober words, seemingly sober, seem to tie in with his actions. So, so would a drunk Betazoid be more sensitive in their abilities or less? I think Luxana is a good case study in that one because he seems to be mostly drinking when she's around. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell between like what's made up, like what she just seems to think is on someone's mind, or what the reality is. It's a very strange form of gaslighting. What do you think, Eve?
Well, Loxana is one of my favorite characters, but because I honestly think she gets short shifted by a lot of people and they miss who she really is with all her silliness. But it is like I would think if we look at Deanna specifically and her being drunk and the way she was acting as a drunk, you can tell that that's somebody who doesn't get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
She's not like, she does not have experience drinking. Somebody like Loxana who drinks a lot has experience drinking, so we may not see it as much. But for somebody who doesn't have experience drinking and has something that's different in their mind like that, you can see different things happen. Like I know you and I talked a little bit about this behind the scenes, Stan, about how I was saying some people with things like autism and stuff, drinking can affect them in a much different way or an unexpected way than an average person, just because of the way the brain is wired and it processes things. And that can be either good or bad. It depends on the person. Mm-hmm. But I would think, considering Betazoids have to be like they have to be thinking about being in control of their abilities. Because Deanna said that if they weren't, they'd be overwhelmed, like that one episode Tin Man with the one Betazoid who was born away. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of wondering if they get drunk, if they become like that.
Maybe they get drunk in order to be normal. Like, or not normal, but like switch off their, abilities for a bit, just to take a little bit of vacation from reading everybody's mind.
That would almost be like in Babylon 5, that one character, Londo, and he's got the creep thing on his neck at the end, and he gets drunk so it can't read his mind. That's what you just reminded me of.
Also, like, Deanna's abilities are empathic versus like telepathic. So it's more like, not only would she not necessarily have an understanding of how to regulate herself, but not really necessarily understanding how other people act in that state, because she's been on the Enterprise and all they drink is synthahol pretty much. Yeah. So like seeing a drunk person also would be a kind of a novel experience. And maybe I would wonder like how they would read something like that.
Well, considering Klingons are about the only thing you see routinely drunk on real stuff.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Dan? Do you think Betazoids are sharper, duller, like more insight?
more alien, more Betazoid somehow. Mm-hmm. But I think I suspect that would avoid alcohol at all costs because it might make them might have a reaction like in The Loss, where she completely loses her powers and like can't deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
She really struggles with it.
But yeah, it was definitely obvious she didn't have any experience drinking when she's like something called tequila. Like,
and Riker was like rolling his eyes, like, "Oh God!" Clearly, he knows what that is.
Well, we know.
Who do you think drank the worm? Who do you think drank the worm? Zephyr or Troi?
That the worm doesn't go in tequila. That's mezcal.
Okay, good. Thank you. There were.
No, I found that one out a while ago. Apparently, it's mezcal, which is sort of like knockoff tequila that has the worm.
I think Zephyr would have eaten it. I think after Conspiracy, Deanna doesn't want anything to do with that.
Yeah. That and she lives in a world where eating gach is normal.
That's true. That's true. But
And
it's
their best living.
but like Riker went full head first into that culture and eating that, whereas like everybody else around him was like, that's really not tasty looking. Why do you think that the Borg are so obsessed with humanity?
I don't think they are.
I
don't think they are.
Care to elaborate?
I think we see more of that than there actually is, because Star Trek is depicted from a human perspective by and large. But they're all, like, as we know, like the by the designation numbers of the sheer amount of species that Borg have assimilated, there are thousands of other species that they assimilate and have assimilated than just humans.
But like the people that they've tapped, except for Data, like Jurati, like Picard, they seem to look at these folks, human beings, as equals. Like why them out of all the other species that they have? Like you said, you said, Picard wasn't supposed to be just another drone, and the same went for Data.
And it was implied Seven had a special position close to the Borg Queen as well.
Right. She was in Unimatrix 0.
Yeah, she was right in the Queen's, basically right in the Queen's chamber, essentially.
Yeah. Why are humans their right hand people?
Because we don't really have an ability that you would think they would want. Because usually when they go around assimilating, it's because you either have a technology they want. Or an ability, like the Ferengi, for instance, have an incredibly low species number, meaning they were encountered very early on. And let's face it, the Ferengi are one of the more useless aliens in terms of what they can do. So I would think for them, they had a piece of technology that the Borg wanted, but humans don't really have any technology the Borg don't have. We don't have any abilities they don't have.
I don't think it's only about technology. I think it's about like areas of space and stuff like that, because like I was thinking, like you say that about the Ferengi, but the Ferengi alliance is quite, stretches quite a bit, and like humans with being like one of the founding member species of the Federation, that's a lot of area to cover as well.
Right. And like the Ferengi are also extremely adept at negotiating. So, and they've avoided war for their entire history due to their ability to negotiate. So I would think that if the Borg are going to assimilate them, they would, maybe come up with a more persuasive way of assimilating people than just announcing like, we are the Borg, lower your shields and drop your weapons. They would come up with something a little more, who knows, like, maybe the seductive angle came from the Ferengi. Who knows? Maybe they read Umox for Fun and Profit. Who knows?
Using feminine wiles.
Right. I think it has to do with also like humanity's core belief that, that Picard and all these other people put up such a strong defense and trying to resist them. Like, most people know better than to resist the Borg. But, I think humanity has, tried and sometimes failed to avoid being assimilated, and that determination and perseverance to abstain from being assimilated. I think that has something to do with it.
Well, because the only species we know of the Borg making an alliance with is humans, which happens in Voyager. Right. And okay, it is out of necessity, but it's the only time the Borg have ever been willing to make an alliance with another species. So it's kind of like, okay, they make an alliance with humanity because they went where they weren't supposed to and found something they shouldn't.
I was thinking as well, like it's not just the Borg that consider, or apparently at least consider humans sort of special. Because I was thinking back to Enterprise in the Vulcan trilogy in season 4, and Saval telling Admiral Forrest just before Saval's killed, like that humans are seen as special by even like the species that is most familiar with humans, or that we're led to believe is most familiar with humans, i.e. Vulcans, and the sheer range of things that they can do, and you know, the sheer range of personalities and etc. Saval says to Forrest.
Maybe like humanity is uniquely individuated. You know, so maybe like people with really strong personalities are just very intriguing to them.
I mean, we are one of the youngest races to be out in space, as implied by the show too.
Right.
Because the Andorians, like even the other founding races, Andorians, Vulcans, Tellarites, they've all been out in space for a long time before we show up. The Bajorans have a history that goes back 10,000 years.
Right, with that sail ship.
Yeah, so like there's a lot of species, like it is, you know, we are considered to be one of the younger races out there, so.
So the opening space battle sequence was considerably toned down. Do you think it's still big enough in scale? And is it too similar to the Battle of Wolf 359, which might be confusing for casual Star Trek viewers? I thought the battle sequence could have, like, for me, it's a movie. You got a bigger budget, you have a little more time, you have a little bit of wiggle room to let a story breathe, and the battle sequence could have been a bit longer. It could have been a bit more high stakes, yeah, we didn't necessarily have to go like, you know, Balance of Terror route where we just hear things. I remember at one point they mentioned that the Admiral passed away. So it's like we just kind of hear that, and it kind of reminded me of Balance of Terror, where it's like you kind of just hear about casualties. But yeah, I agree. It could have been fleshed out a little bit more.
It makes sense, though, for it to look similar to Wolf 359, because the one thing about the Borg is they don't change what they do. The Borg are relentless, and they always do things the same way for the most part. Like, they adapt, but their battle tactics have always been pretty much the same. And, I mean, I know that First Contact was written with the implication that people would have, at the very least, seen the best of both worlds, because otherwise the whole movie doesn't really make sense, because you'd be wondering why Picard's got PTSD and why he can't let go. You can't. So I think that one was written specifically directed at the fans, so they probably weren't thinking about it. Because I like that, because I know Nemesis was written specifically for for the casual ones, which is why it had such a different tone. But the first three, they didn't have that different tone because they were written for the fans. You know, Generations to end Captain Kirk, First Contact to tie up more of Picard's history with the Borg. So, and just from the way the dialogue throughout the movie and everything was written in First Contact, it just feels like they were writing it strictly for the fans. Because you can't really watch it without having seen Best of Both Worlds, or it just doesn't even make sense.
Or Naked Now.
Yeah.
It seems to me that each time they did the movie, they tried as hard as they could to accommodate both the fans and like brand new viewers. Like I've got the Generations novel. I'm sure it's got like quite a few. I've got like behind the scenes segments like right at the back of the dramatized rest of the novel. About the upcoming film, whichever one it was to be, and I'm sure it's either the Generations one or the First Contact one, where Rick Berman talks like specifically about that, like how to remake it so that like new viewers who have never seen Star Trek before can still understand this film. They've tried to do that.
So, how does Picard not get a court martial for disobeying orders? I think it harkens back to why Michael Burnham does not get a court martial after all the things she does, like throwing somebody out of an airlock, for example, because in the end they save the day, and that's what makes it okay.
The end justifies the means. That's pretty
Exactly.
Section 31.
Yeah. That's basically why I think they sort of also his superior officer dies. So he's like, I'm not going to listen to a dead guy's orders. That's fine. So I can do whatever I want now.
It's very unlike Picard, though. He's not typically a breaker of protocol. Like, I'd say out of all the captains, he tends to be one who tends to stick to the rules more. Whereas you see like Sisko and Janeway, they play hard and fast with the rules all the time. Janeway out of necessity, and Sisko because he's fighting a war, like a literal war. But yeah, Picard's always been more staunch to following the rules. And Kirk was like the literal space cowboy.
Also, like the
rules didn't apply to him.
The thing that they did was just sort of like put him in a corner and a timeout, essentially, to prevent him from engaging with the Borg. And it just kind of got past the point of that situation making any sense. Like being at the Romulan border for what? We're just sitting here while our entire fleet's being destroyed. Like that just doesn't make any sense.
Well, like they said, they didn't want him to be compromised because of background, which I mean, I could see that being a thing too.
But it's also the biggest gun they got.
Yeah.
And that it ceased to make any sense once the Admiral died.
Yeah.
I think it makes a difference that like you're actually like seeing the Enterprise E at that point, because like I was thinking because of a very similar situation that Pike's Enterprise apparently went through during the Clone War and being told to sit out of it, and like you don't see the Enterprise during that time, because I think like as a viewer you'd be like, what are they doing? Why are they not coming to like these folks' rescue?
Right. Yeah, I think definitely the ends justify the means, and they just sort of, it's fine. What's people's opinion of the Borg Queen when she says that she is Borg? Is she speaking literally or figuratively? And is this the version of the character exactly the same as we see in any of the other Trek productions of the Borg Queen? Like, how does this Borg Queen differ from the others? Like the one on Voyager, the one on, TNG, the one on Picard, the different iterations of her? Or is it just the same type of characterization throughout? I definitely think this one was much heavier on the sex thing. I think it was much, much heavier on that, a little like too much. But yeah, I think that's what makes this specific Borg Queen distinct from the rest, personally.
Well, I mean, you'd have to think over time too, because there is time that passes between like Wolf 359 and First Contact. There's time that passes between then and when Janeway meets the Borg out in the Delta Quadrant. And I mean, it's implied that the Borg Queen only comes forth when she's required. But you would have to assume that as the Borg are running around assimilating on their way to perfection, that she herself would evolve and change, because she would have to a point. Because if she doesn't, any culture that doesn't evolve, even something as, homogenous as Borg, is going to eventually fail. So, I mean, she would be learning and changing and, discovering new ways.
I wish we got a little bit more background about her character arc in that case. Like, what is it that pushes her to change? She's just happens to be more sexual in this one. She just happens to be more of this or that in another iteration, but we don't really get a ton of background other than, like you said, assimilating other species of people.
Well, it wouldn't make sense to have her be overly sexualized in Voyager, because nowhere is it implied that Janeway swings that way. So it kind of would have stood out like, huh? Because he only deals with Janeway in Voyager for the most part. But in TNG, she's dealing with male characters. So it makes more sense there. Because, yeah, I'm trying to imagine like a really flirty Borg Queen with somebody as no nonsense as Janeway, and it's just not working for me.
Yeah, I guess like even if we have the secondary sexual characteristics of the Borg Queen, and she's called a queen and she's referred to as she, her, I have a hard time sort of grokking the gender thing because it's a robot. Is it because the Borg Queen pre-assimilation was a woman? I'm a little lost on that one. Like, how would that determine her sexuality? I don't know. Like, yeah, it seems a little muddy to me because of the mechanical part of it.
Well, I mean, they are compared to an insect colony, and I mean, insect colonies are always ruled by a queen.
In fact, you reminded me as well. She's not actually called the Borg Queen, and which took me by surprise. And like, she's not called the Borg Queen at all in this film. It's only like in the credits that it says Borg Queen.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we get her called Borg. I don't think she's called Borg Queen until Voyager.
Well, in the end credits of this film. Yes.
No, I mean, but to come out of somebody's mouth.
Yeah. In dialogue.
Yeah. But yeah, because it's implied many times that they're somewhat like an insect colony. You know,
the whole idea of the Borg was that they were to be the species that's in conspiracy.
Yeah, that storyline they just kind of dropped and never came back to.
Yeah.
But I mean, and then the funny thing is when you mention the sexualization of her, we see when Jurati becomes linked with the Borg Queen, you can't tell me that red dress scene wasn't there for a certain reason. Like, we go back to having a somewhat sexualized representation of Borg again. So
I think actually the actress has said this as well. I can't remember. Described her as omnisexual, basically.
Anybody else see some similarity between the Borg Queen's use of Data's emotion chip and how Laura used it? What do you think, Eve?
Form of control, because and I don't remember the episode title where he's with Lore because I'm bad with titles, but it's the one where Lore's got basically trying to get Data, of course, to be by his side, and he's literally controlling Data with the emotion chip, and it's almost like an addiction, like, because he tells him, okay, I think you have too much, so he takes back some of his emotion, and then he's like, no, I think you can I'll give you a little more to overwhelm you, and he kind of does it. To me, it almost makes me think of like like a drug dealer and the guy he's selling to, but even the Borg Queen, she's the one who reactivates Data's emotion chip and then specifically uses that to get to him. You know, she doesn't appeal to his logic. She doesn't appeal to that. And you see her take control of it. So I kind of have to wonder if that was done deliberately just to show that, you know, once again, Data can be a victim of his own.
Well, I think manipulative people seek out the vulnerable parts of you and sort of look to exploit that. And I think because the Borg Queen is a manipulative being, that's exactly straight for what she would go for. I mean, she kind of does that with Picard too. She kind of does that with Jurati, just constantly appealing to her sense of loneliness. Like as soon as she like zeroed in on that, you know, so it's like as soon as she finds like a dent in the armor, that's what she goes for.
Yeah, and Data's dent has always been his quest to be more human. Because Lore used that against him, because Lore was the more human of them, which is why Lore was deactivated in the first place. And I mean, the Borg Queen, we see her giving him skin, like, and then her stimulating the skin by like blowing on it and stuff,
Right.
to evoke emotion. So when you say she hones in on your like weakness and finds it, and that's where she goes, that would make sense, because Data's greatest weakness has always been his desire to achieve humanity. And the one thing that's always kept him separate was his emotions, or lack thereof.
Right. Like he was like compassionate, but he just didn't like experience the emotions on his own. Like,
No.
yeah.
He described it as, he said, like it created certain pathways over time in his brain that would light up, and so that was how he experienced like friendship and stuff.
Right.
I just can't remember who he said. I think he said that to Geordi, but I can't remember.
I think so as well.
You would know better than I would.
Picard mentioned that he was meant to be the bridge between humanity and the Borg. Could that have influenced Picard season 2?
I just remembered the episode's name that you were thinking about, Descent.
Okay.
2.2.
What do you think, Dan? Do you think that this movie sort of was the zygote of Picard season 2?
I'm not familiar with the term zygote, but
a zygote is what becomes a fetus, essentially.
Oh, right. I think it's I think it inspired Picard season 2. But I think there were I know, like, at least John Eves worked on like the design of both productions. I'm thinking back to just so many concept illustrations for First Contact, and stuff like the Borg Queen shuttle that was conceptualized for Picard season 2, that I thought was quite similar to some of the unused concepts that were drawn up for First Contact and never used likewise. So yeah, I thought it was quite interesting to look at that stuff.
I thought there was a lot of parallels between First Contact and Picard season 2. The fact that they sort of like see a hellish outcome of one event not happening, specifically a space launch, and having to go back in time and make sure that happens.
I think of it a bit like a mix between First Contact and the Voyage Home, though, because I think like the Voyage Home was very redolent of, very similar to Picard season 2 as well, with it being not a futuristic era like we have in First Contact, but like a current one, or nearly current one, as in the case of Picard season.
The Queen wanted an equal, hence Locutus. Then Data was Jurati, maybe the equal. Like, what was more equal about Jurati? More equal about Jurati versus Data or Picard? Is it just? This is getting a little off topic in terms of the movie, but I think it's an intriguing question. Like, why Jurati and not the others?
Well, Jurati kind of accepted her influence. She didn't fight it. Like, okay, she fought her taking over total control, but she willingly took on what the Borg Queen was offering. Whereas Picard did not. It was against his will, and Data was pretending. Whereas Jurati, she accepted it because she actually fought to be allowed to do it.
Right.
Because she had the Queen in her for quite some time.
You know, when in First Contact, when they say like the Borg Queen wanted an equal, I don't think I've ever taken that at base level. I've never accepted that is actually accurate. I'm not able to believe that.
You think it's just a bad line?
I think the writers think that. I think the writers ultimately concluded that. And I think, I think the Borg Queen in Picard season 2 seems to be a lot different because, like that actress said, she actually described that Borg Queen as quite different because she's so alone when we first see her at the start of Picard season 2. And it's like, I think Jurati like sees potential in the, ultimately that's what ultimately happens, of course, seeing that she becomes the leader of the Borg Confederate, or no, it's called something else, but I can't remember. All the members join willingly, basically. They're not assimilated. They're not. It's not the same as the Borg Collective because the Borg Collective actually exists, and it's a different faction of Borg.
Borg
Well, like
2.0.
the Borg Queen in
Yeah,
season 2
basically.
is completely cut off from the collective because it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, it does exist,
Mhm.
but they're still in the Delta Quadrant.
Right.
In the future.
And like she, I think it's that she's so desperate to not be lonely and sees a kindred spirit and seeing another lonely person. I think it's that simple.
Mhm.
Yeah, because the Borg aren't aware of us until Q throws the ship into the path of the Borg. Up
Right.
until then, the Borg have no knowledge of us, and we have no knowledge of them.
Well, there's also some difference between that, like Q and when you see Annika Hansen's parents in Dark Frontier, that episode of Voyager, because apparently like that happens before.
But then you've got the first contact drones that are found in Enterprise, which is before everything else. So you get back to the time travel thing.
So what are your earliest memories of seeing this film? I actually initially saw it in a cut version, and like it was pared down to a 45-minute episode versus like an entire movie. So my impression of it was very different. I actually have only seen it this week. So that's my earliest memory of seeing the film this week in its entirety. And the first half, I was like, oh my God, no way. This is like not my jam. But for some reason, the second half completely changed my mind about the movie. Like it completely turned itself around. The dialogue got way better. the situations that they found themselves in made more sense. I completely just flipped. How about you, Dan? When was your earliest memory of seeing this movie?
Oh, just seeing it so many times in the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and being wowed by the special effects and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited before it came out as well.
Mm-hmm. I remember, Eve, you mentioned you saw this when you were much younger as well.
Yeah. Well, because the first one I got to see in theater would have been Nemesis, and that one came out, I think, in 2003 or something, because I know it came out about the same time I finished university, but I was in university at a young age. And I recall some of us in university, we didn't have class that day. I had to think about this. We didn't have class that day because the professor didn't show up. So we all went home. And a few of us decided we wanted to just screw off and watch some TV or whatever. So we decided to watch First Contact because a few of us had just seen Best of Both Worlds recently. And there was one guy in our group who was a hardcore Trekkie, and he's like, okay, then you've got to see this movie. It's the best one. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we were getting our hands on a few substances that were not age appropriate for us. The advantage of having university friends who were old enough. But so we were, and I remember we were sitting there in the basement just watching this movie and just sitting there, like at first seeing like the big battle and going like, you were like, no way. But in our case, it was like, no way, this is so cool. Mm-hmm. But the thing that stuck out for us was for weeks afterwards, we were quoting the movie, and for us,
it does assimilate this. And
Yeah,
The-
like we used to do it like it went, and because we were in an IT class, we would be sitting there and the professor would be like, okay, guys, I need you to download this. And we'd be like, assimilate this. And he's just like, oh, knock it off back there. And, it had so many good lines, like, to hell with our orders. Like when he said, our professor, you guys need to do this, to hell with them,
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was very like, I'll be back kind of one-liners.
Yeah, it became kind of our thing for a while in university to just throw these lines out there until finally he's like, okay, knock it off with the Star Trek in the back there. Like,
so much better than Monty Python, honestly.
Yeah. Like, I love the humor in it. Like, for me, it was in a way some of the most humorous part of the movie.
Yes.
But I'd have to say one of the best things they threw in there, and it only works. We talked about it after, some of us. The one part that only works because it was Patrick Stewart was the line about Captain Ahab has to hunt his whale.
Mm-hmm.
That would not work with any other captain because that so fits with Patrick Stewart's theatrical background, his literary background,
Right.
and it really does sum up the whole movie nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Ahab had to hunt his whale, and then he starts quoting it, and then she goes, I never read it. And we actually had one guy in our group who had never read Moby Dick. So we made
neither. And I should. It looks like a good read.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a bit slow, but it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I'd have to say it was one of our favorites.
I thought it's interesting that you say like that line, to hell with our orders, was like effective, in your opinion, because I think in mine, like it wasn't, because I was thinking by that time it was sort of becoming a bit of a trope with I think it's someone says at the end of Dawn of the Discovered Country. I think it's Spock.
But the fact that it's Data saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking Data, Mr. Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't swear. Like,
I mean, they kind of played that up in another TNG movie, didn't they? Where he said the S word as they were going down.
He says the S word in Generations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think this movie, I think a lot of the TNG movies were sort of like playing with the characters, like, oh, we couldn't do this on TV. Let's have them do it in a movie. Like, even with the sexual stuff, even with like just being a little bit looser with their and not as like stiffly rigid.
Speaking of which, we haven't discussed like whether Patrick Stewart was wanting Picard to be more of an action hero. So.
Yeah, I remember you answered that pretty succinctly, and I thought, okay. But yeah, like did Patrick Stewart want to be an action hero? Was that really like the agenda? Because if there was like that scene in the holodeck where he is going full Scarface, gun in hand, and just it just like there's many scenes like that where he is just gleefully shooting Borg.
Well, that scene made me think of Dune, like I said, where you see him in Dune and he's carrying a freaking pug into battle and blasting things. And you're just like, you can't get, and I mean, now there's even an internet meme that says you can't get more badass than Patrick Stewart carrying a pug into war. Like, and I mean, he does have some movies where he is a little bit more of a action hero, like X-Men. So I could see that because, I mean, yeah, he's known to be one of the last of the great British Shakespearean actors and thespians. That much we know, just like his friend Sir Ian. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think he wanted to be more of an action hero because I mean,
Picard's a very ponderous, literary, solitary guy. He's not really out there blasting people away. So I think it was interesting to see Picard like that.
And he always did have the Dixon Hill thing. And I mean, those pulp novels were not, the PIs were not a PI like now where most of their time is spent eating donuts and watching people. It was, they were more rough and tumble. They had to get their hands dirty, right? Mm-hmm. And that's his entertainment of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think if you look at their holodeck preferences for most of the characters, it gives you an insight into them.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right about that. Dan, what do you think? Do you think Patrick Stewart was like trying his hardest to be the action hero that he always wanted to be, I guess, in this particular movie?
Well, yeah, I know that was a consideration of Patrick Stewart in general with the TNG films, because Michael Piller talked about it in his book. They wrote about the writing of Star Trek Interaction and how it affected the writing of that. You know, hasn't he got like he's got like gradually removing pieces of clothing while he's swinging about in both films, basically.
I like that he had like a Starfleet vest on at one point where everybody else was like in a sweater, like showing off the guns, you know?
Yeah.
So how many pips would you give this movie? I give it a 4. I think it's pretty solid. I think there's some bigger takeaways that are kind of missing, like the hero worship. It's not an idea that's quite realized personally, but I think it's a solid 4. How about you, Eve?
I would say that too, yeah, because it's and I mean, not even just objectively, the sales and the critics' reviews and stuff would support that, because if I remember right, First Contact is the one that did the best out of all the Next Generation films.
Right.
Kind of like Star Trek 4 was the biggest seller out of the original 6 movies. You know, that's not to diminish 2 and 3, which were awesome, but 4 was the big one.
Right.
You know, although they kind of got lucky because Greenpeace was popular at the time, but yeah, I would say this one would be a solid 4 because it's a solid movie. It doesn't have a lot of things in it that don't fit. It ties up a lot of loose ends, but it doesn't come across as a tired movie either. There's still the energy. There's still the animosity and the hatred. Like when you see him smash his ships, like, you know, there's a lot of real emotion in that movie, more so. It's like it's an action movie, but it's still got like the human element to it. If it was more straight action like Nemesis, then I would give it a lower rating. But
how about you, Dan?
I'd give it it's out of 5 pips, right?
Yes.
I'd give it 10 or 15. No, joking.
That's Dan,
no,
Super Admiral.
No, probably like 3. I prefer Nemesis, always have done. But I do enjoy First Contact as well. I think I really enjoyed the music in First Contact. One aspect about it. And just, I was thinking, I think it's not only inspired like Picard season 2, but it seems to have been like a huge influence on Enterprise, from the premise of that show. You know, just going ahead in the timeline from where First Contact leaves us, basically in the past, and as well as, you know, like the start of In and Out of Darkly, not too far through, where you see it's very similar to Zafran Cochrane meeting the Vulcan that comes off the ship, which was apparently related to Spock, a descendant. But yeah, in that case, in the case of In the Mirror Darkly, it's in the Mirror Universe, and Zafran Cochrane shoots the Vulcan.
All right. We hope you, our viewers, have enjoyed this. Let us know in the comments section what you thought about this particular movie, First Contact. Please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we'll see you next time. Trek you later.
And we'll be discussing Lower Deck Season 3 next time.